Hi there, hello, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Machiavelli's Discourses. Today we're continuing our examination of Book 2. As you know, you don't hear the the fan on today because it is very cold outside, and systems like this is weird. We got a cold streak in May, right? Okay, so we're continuing our examination of Book 2, looking at Chapter 16. How much the soldiers of our time do not conform to the ancient orders. So he's talking about our time, his time he's writing, that, in other words, and he's saying that the soldiers of Italy and the soldiers of the time that he's doing don't conform to the ancient orders, the Romans or the... He goes, so let's go, and this is going to be an attack on, his critique of the modern arms. The most important battle ever waged by the Roman people in any war with any nation was that which it waged with the Latin peoples in the consulate of Tarcov and Discourses. Right. This is Livy 8, 6, and Livy 8, 6, and 11. Right. Torah Quintus and Decisis. For every reason, agree. Now, okay, wills or wishes, literally wills. For every will agrees that as the Latins became servile through having lost it, so the Romans would have become servile if they had not won it. So this is in other words, this battle, this war, the war that they waged at the Latin people under these is decisive. This is the thing that where the Latins become servile to the Romans. Otherwise, it would the other way. The Romans would have been servile to the Latins. Titus Livy is of the opinion, for he makes the armies alike in every respect, in order, virtue, obstinacy, and number. The only difference he makes is that that the heads of the Roman army were more virtuous than those of the Latin army. In other words, he says that everything else was the same except leadership. The Roman heads were more virtuous than the Latin leadership, right? One also sees how two accidents arose in the managing of this battle that had not arisen before, and of which there have been rare examples since. To keep the spirits of the soldier firm, obedient to their commands, and decided on combat, one of the two consuls killed himself, and the other his son killed his son. Right? This is the two. One killed himself, and the other killed his son. The likeness that Titus Livy says there was between the armies was that from having served in the military together for a long time, they were alike in language, order, and arms. They kept to the same mode in ordering the battle, and the ranks and the heads of the ranks had the same names. It was necessary then, since they were like forces and like virtues, that something extraordinary should arise that would make the spirits of the one firmer and more obstinate than the other. Victory, as was said at other points. Okay, this is literally 3, Discourse 1, 14, and 15. Discourse 1, both chapters 14 and 15, right? Consistent obstinacy. Struggle, they were running this. For a while it endures in the breast of those who engage in combat, armies never turn back. So, in other words, obstinacy is that they're dedicated to the win. They want to win. They're single-minded to the win, right? They're obstinate in that sense. Once it breaks, then the other one will win, right? Breaks in the breast of those who engage in combat, armies never turn back. For it to endure more in the breasts of the Roman than those of the Latin, partly fate, partly virtue, of the consuls made it arise that Tarquinius had to kill his son. Again, this is Livy 8:7. And Decius, or not it's Decius, had to kill himself, right? This is 8:9, the line after it, right? That two things had to happen. He had to kill his son, Tarquinius had to kill his son, and Decius had to kill himself. In showing this likeness of forces, Ticid Livy shows the whole order that the Romans kept in armies in fighting. He explains it extensively. I will not repeat it otherwise, but will discourse only of that in it that I judge notable, and the neglect of which, by which all the captains of those times had produced many disorders in armies and fights. In other words, so therefore he's gonna. I will not repeat it otherwise, but will discourse only that it is. In other words, the Romans kept their armies, and the way they fought, it, organized it, was notable, right? And they didn't. When those who didn't do it, they produced disorders in armies and fights. I say thus, that from the text of Livy, one gathers that the Roman army had three principal divisions, which is the Tuscans, they would call three siceri, lines, siceri line, three lines. And they called the first the Astatari, the second the Principali, which means princes, right? Which is the Principali, and the princes. In other words, the first is the Astari, the second is the princes, and the third the Tarai. And each of these had its own troop of horse. And ordering a battle, they put the Asati in front. The second place, right in back of them, they put the Principali, and the third, in the same file, they placed the Tarai. They put the horse in all these ranks, okay, on the right and on the left of these battalions. The lines of the horse were called alai, from their form and place, and they appeared like two wings of the body. They ordered the first line, that of the Astenti, and which was in the front, to be locked together in such a mode that it could contain and stand up against the enemy. Since the second line, that of the Principali, was not the first in combat, but well suited to relieve the first when beaten or pushed back, they did not make it tight, but kept its ranks sparse in such a quality that without disordering itself, it could receive the first into itself whenever shoved back by the enemy and necessitated to withdraw. In other words, that these were looser. The second line was more looser. First line was very tight and formatted so that the second line could then what? Because it was looser, the first line could fall back into it and receive them. And the third line, that of the Triari, had its rank still more spaced than the second, to be able, when needed, to receive into itself the first two lines, those of the Principali and the Astanti. These lines placed thus in this form joined to fight. If the Astari were forced back to or defeated, they withdrew into the spaces between the ranks of the Principali, and all united together made one body from two lines and rejoined the fight. If these were also repelled and forced back, they all withdrew within the spaces between the ranks of the Tarcov, and all three lines became one body and renewed the fight. If they were overcome then, since all were no longer able to recover, they lost the fight. Since the army was in danger whenever this last line of the Tarcov was put to work, a proverb wrote, the affair will be brought back to the Triade, right? Latin adapted from Livy 8, right? Which Tuscan use meant, we have played our last stake. As captains of our time have abandoned all other orders and do not observe any part of the ancient discipline, so they have abandoned this part, which is of no little importance. For whoever orders himself so that he can recover 3 times in battle has to have fortune his enemy 3 times to be able to lose, and has to have against him a virtue capable of conquering him 3 times. In other words, the Romans were they designed it so that it was designed to have an enemy that could, it says fortune and virtue could defeat them 3 times before they lost. 3 times, and that's. But whomever does not stand except against the first punch, as do all Christian armies today, can lose easily from any disorder, any middling virtue, can take victory away from them. In other words, the Romans had a strict order, this 3-lined structure. Okay. The Christians at the time of today, Christian army, they put everything together at one moment like this, right? And therefore anything, he says, whoever does not stand except against the first push, as do all Christian armies today, can lose easily. For any disorder, any middling virtue can take away victory from them. What makes our armies lack the ability to recover 3 times is having lost the mode of receiving one line into the other. In other words, the modern warfare seems to have lost the ability. The Romans' ability to have this line come into this line and join together. Okay, our modern armies lack the ability to recover 3 times. This arises from the present battle are ordered with one, in other words, receiving one line into the other. This arises because at present battles are ordered with one of these disorders. Either they put their lines shoulder to shoulder and make their battle array extensive across and thin in depth, which makes it weaker because it has little between the front and the rear. Or instead, to make it stronger, they shorten the lines in the Roman style. So therefore, in other words, either do 2 things. They make everything like across. They put all their lines shoulder to shoulder to make the battle lines extensive across, but thin in depth. Or instead, to make them stronger, they shorten the lines in the Roman style. If the first front is defeated, since there is no order by which it can be received by the second, they will get tangled together and break themselves. In other words, there's no spacing between them, he's saying. That everyone's together very tight. Everyone's together very tight. If they make themselves... no, he says, the Roman situation was that they gave some space in it, right? But the moderns, if they're going to go in this... If they're going to make it one after another, like the Romans, they don't do it like the Romans by giving loosely, having the second and the third looser, but rather they're all tight like the first one. So when things go badly, these guys get crushed into these ones. They all get tangled together and break themselves. For if one in the front is shoved back, it pushes the second and if the second wishes to go front, it impeded by the first. With the first pushing the second, and the second the third. So much confusion arises that often the least accident ruins the army. The Spanish and the French armies in the fighting of Ravenna, where Monsieur de Fleury, captain of the troops of France, died, in which was a battle of very well done combat for our times, were ordered by one of the modes written above. That is, both the one and the other army came with their troops ordered shoulder to shoulder, in such a mode that neither the one nor the other could had more than the one in front, and they were much wider across than deep. This always happens to them when they have a great field, as they had in Ravenna. For knowing the disorder that they produce in withdrawing, they avoided it when they can put themselves together in one file, making the front extensive, as it was said. But when the country constrains them, they stay in the disorder written above without thinking of the remedy. In other words, they come in, they don't know how to come into the thing that. So again, he says that the disorder of the field, right? Not for knowing the disorder that they produce in withdrawing, they avoid it when they can by putting themselves in one file, making the front extensive, as I said. But when the country constrains them, right, they can't do that. They stay in disorder written above, in that sense, of the loosely structured things. If the same disorder, in the same disorder, they ride through the enemy country, either if they prey upon it, or if they manage another affair of war. Right? It's just how they ill-disciplined, ill-structured in that sense. In Centrality, in the territory of Pisa and elsewhere, the Florentines were defeated by the Pistians in the time of the war between the Florentines and that city because of its rebellion after the coming into Italy of Charles, King of France. Ruin did not arise from anywhere else than from the friendly cavalry. In other words, the cavalry just being in front and beaten back by the enemy, it crashed and broke into the Florentine infantry, where for all the remainder of the troops turned back. Messer Niccolò di Borgo, former head of the Florentine infantry, had often affirmed in my presence never to have been defeated except by the hands of by the cavalry of friends. In other words, your own allies' cavalry, they broke into your lines, and they end up breaking your lines. When they serve in the military with the French, the Swiss, who are masters of modern war, take care above all things to put themselves on the side so that if friendly cavalry is beaten back, it will not push into them. In other words, the Swiss understand this. They don't put themselves near friendly cavalry. Although these things appear easy to understand and very easy to do, nevertheless, not even one of our contemporary captains is found who imitates the ancient orders and corrects the modern. And although they may still have their army tripart, right, calling one vanguard, second battalion, the battalion, and the third the rear guard, they do not make it serve other than to command them in quarters. In other words, they're not organized to interconnect. But in putting them to work, it is rare, as said above, that they do not make all of these bodies incur in the same fortune. In other words, they treat them as autonomous. They don't make them able to interconnect and to work together to ensure that they can achieve something together. So this is So therefore, he says, although they still have the tripart division, calling them like this, they do not make it serve other than to command them in their quarters, right? Just, they keep them this way to command them individually, right? But by putting them to work, it is rare, as has been said above, that they do not make all these bodies incur one and the same fortune, in that sense. So, last paragraph, short one. Because to excuse their ignorances, many cite the violence of artillery, which does not suffer many orders of ancient to be used in these times. I wish to dispute this matter in the following chapter. I wish to examine if the artillery is such an impediment that one cannot use ancient virtue. So therefore, the next chapter is going to bring in the question of artillery. Now the argument is, well, we forgive. In other words, artillery changed the game. He's saying the moderns right. Machiavelli says in the next chapter he's going to address the question of artillery and argues that maybe artillery is not as technology doesn't change. Maybe the Romans would have been able to handle it. Okay, so if you have any comments or questions, please put them below. If you have any questions or comments, that's always useful. Second thing is, if you want to know, I'll respond to them when I see them. Okay. Second, hit the like button. Hit the like button, please. It helps the chapter. Another thing you do is you can share the video to your friends. Send it to your friends. Share it to your people you think will be interested in this. Share it far and wide. Help it out. And if you've not subscribed, please consider subscribing. It doesn't. All of these things, commenting, liking, sharing, and subscribing, all increases the algorithm, and that way people searching for, like, say, Machiavelli Discourses or something about the Discourses, they will find these videos. Okay, now if you didn't like it, you say, oh, because you interrupted a couple times, you repeated yourself. Well, okay, thumbs down, but give the reason, give the specifics, what I did wrong, or what. Because why? The purpose of this is to learn, right? And maybe if you think I'm wrong here, explain what I did wrong, where I'm wrong on this text, or you disagree with the text and why you disagree with the text. This is the purpose of learning in that sense. Another thing you do, those of you wanting to follow me on social media, the social media links are below. Those who want to know more about me as a researcher and a scholar and check out my academic research and stuff like that, you can check below. The social media links are the academic social media links. And then last but not least, you want to help me out financially in that sense, you can do so by through Patreon or Subscribestar. Links are below. And then another thing to do is you can, if you want to help, another way you can help is to buy one of my books listed below, available books listed below. You can do so, of course, through your local bookstore, or through a book intermediary online distributor like Barnes & Noble, Amazon, or the like, or directly through the publishers. Well, that's it. We finished chapter 16. Next time we'll look at chapter 17. Take care and have a nice day.